But, not everyone knows. Not everything is so overt too. Obviously, someone getting sexually assaulted, right? Yes, that's an obvious, case of sexual harassment. But sometimes there's, more subtle things, right? Sometimes we have people that are getting like groomed and things are slowly happening.
Welcome back to Evolving Your Workplace. I'm Carol Schultz. Today, we're getting into a taboo topic in the business world: sexual harassment, power dynamics, and most importantly, what you as a leader can do to make your workplace a truly safe space. To get some insight, I have attorney Brittany Stevens with us. She's a partner at Phillips and Associates Attorneys at Law, which assists victims of workplace harassment and discrimination. Brittany, thanks for being with me today. And I'd like to start here. Tell our audience a little bit about what you do at the firm.
So thank you for having me today. We are an employee side discrimination law firm. So what we do is we assist employees who have been sexually harassed or discriminated against at their workplace based on a protected class. So based on their age, their national origin, their race, their pregnancy, disability, national origin. And often we come into the picture when people are complaining of a hostile work environment. So people are getting discriminated against because of that protected class, or they are terminated because of that protected class, or they are retaliated against after they make a complaint of discrimination. So that's really what we do. We assist people after they've been sexually harassed or terminated and need some guidance.
Got it. So the firm was founded by William Phillips in 2011. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired Bill to start the firm?
Sure. So, he had a career before this. He was, in the finance world and, he wanted to kind of pivot, change what he was doing. And he started working for another attorney who was handling employment discrimination. And he saw firsthand how many people just really needed help. These are people calling after they've suffered like the most horrific things at work, and being able to offer a place where people can complain to and listen was just very powerful. And that's why I even am in this field too, right? Like to be able to be that person's like first phone call after they have gone through a very difficult time at their place of employment is like very rewarding.
Yeah, I get that. So let's dive in a little bit into harassment in the workplace, something that's little talked about publicly, yet happening to about 1 in 4 U.S. workers. How do you define harassment?
So, how the law defines harassment is often very difficult than like what, lay people may think
Yeah.
of harassment. And, the definition changes based on where you practice, right? The federal laws define harassment and discrimination differently than the state laws and the city laws. But if we're talking about like sexual harassment, we're really talking about like unwanting sexual conduct that, makes someone uncomfortable. That is both like subjectively, makes them uncomfortable, and then objectively could be deemed as, something that can be deemed sexual harassment under the law, right? Because some people can be offended by something, but objectively, it may not rise to that level.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's why these cases, discrimination cases, are so fact dependent, right? Because we really have to analyze every fact pattern, every person that calls us, because some people may think they have a claim and it may not rise to that level under the law. And then a lot of times people call us saying, I don't know if I have something, and we listen and we are of the mindset, oh wow, of course you have something, right? Like this is a very egregious claim.
So then because of what I'm hearing about you, then it's leading me to believe that harassment's not always sexual harassment.
Right. Well, so there's discrimination, right? You can go through a hostile work environment based on, like, let's say your race or your national origin. And people kind of use the term harassment, right? If they're getting harassed at work because of their race, right? We use the term you're going through like a hostile work environment. But again, the facts really matter. It depends, like, what's actually happening, what is the conduct. So we really need to look at everything case by case to determine if there is like a legal claim there.
Do you ever send people back and say, get this on film or on audio or, start taking better notes?
So, yes and no. I mean, when people call us, one of the first questions we ask is, well, what do you have any evidence, right? Especially with discrimination. It's not always out in the open. People are not always that stupid to sexually harass people in front of, other coworkers.
Right.
A lot of things are, he said, she said, or she said, she said, he
Mhm.
said, he said. So, sometimes we do tell people, look, at this early stage, we may not be able to assist now, but maybe call us back if X, Y, or Z happens, right? But yes, certainly having documented evidence or a complaint to human resources, I mean, that really makes the case a lot stronger.
Mhm. How does the power dynamic at work affect this issue?
So, I mean, it's a very real issue, right? I mean, a lot of times employers, they affect the ability to hire, to fire, to promote, to discipline their employees, right? So, the imbalance specifically as it relates to like a supervisor and a subordinate, the subordinate may not always feel like they have the means or the capabilities to say no or feel comfortable enough to
Mhm.
complain about the behavior.
Mm.
And, people are very nervous to stand up against their
Mhm.
boss.
Mhm.
And it's a very real issue. They're afraid of losing hours, losing pay, losing their job.
Mhm.
And it's not always as easy as just saying no, right? We see that all the time. A lot of people sometimes feel like they need to go along with conduct because they are getting threatened about their job.
Mm.
So employers and supervisors hold a lot of power
Yeah.
over employees, and that automatically creates this imbalance.
Mhm. So what does then, a victim of sexual harassment do in a situation where they fear repercussions? They
Yeah,
just
I
go
mean,
they can't just go hide under the covers.
right.
I
I
mean, they
mean,
could, but
feeling empowered to speak up
Mhm.
it's we want to be able to help people feel that
Mhm.
empowerment, right? And like, what companies could do is they can offer human resources departments where people don't fear retaliation, right? I mean, people are scared that they go complain, now they
Yeah.
have a target on their
Yeah.
back, they're seen as the person that is the troublemaker, they are not believed. I mean, there's so many things that people fear. So, really having companies try to ensure to their employees that, like, look, we will do everything we can to protect you if you do decide to come forward is a very important thing. And even having like policies and procedures in place. I can't tell you how many times I get a phone call and doesn't even know where to complain to, right?
Mm.
I asked them, I said, well, did you complain internally? And they say, well, I don't even know who I can complain to because there was never even a policy to begin with.
Wow. That's amazing.
Or what we see is, I represent a lot of like, a lot of, people who are maybe getting sexually harassed by the boss or the CEO.
Mm.
So for them, who could they complain to, right? Like they're getting sexually
Mm.
harassed by, the C-suite executive or the owner of the company.
Yeah, that's so disturbing for me to hear, and I'm sure anybody else who's listening to this, right? Some of the work that I do with my clients is building a culture of feedback, right? But that culture of feedback where you can say anything to anybody at any level without fear of being thrown under the bus or some other negative repercussion has to be driven by the CEO, right? So to your point, what if it's happening from the CEO? And I think sometimes all we can do is to educate people to ask better questions in interviews, right? Of course, that none of that is going to take the place of a situation where somebody needs a job, right? And they may just think, well, this is the only job I can get right now. But I firmly believe if, asking better questions, talking about your culture, is feedback encouraged? Is it discouraged? Where is it? Because in a true culture of feedback, it works and things like this. And then you don't have to worry about going to whomever the power that be are.
Right.
Let me
And
go on.
And I was it's something as easy as maybe Googling the employer, right? Like, some of this stuff is public record.
Yeah.
You can see, if there's been litigation against the
Mhm.
place that you're going to work for. Now, I mean, a lot of matters do settle, so you're not gonna be able
Mhm.
to find out a lot
Right.
of, everything. But, if you Google the company and you see, 10 different lawsuits from pregnant women, maybe that's a red flag that says, "I'm not gonna go work there."
Yeah, 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 well, has the removal of DEI at the federal level affected your work at all?
I mean, we haven't seen anything
Okay.
like an enormous change just yet. I mean, things take time,
Mhm.
things kind of move slowly. But I mean, yes, we're expecting things to change as the months go on, and that's to be expected.
Are there certain types of companies that, when you hear from somebody, it's this type of a company or that type of a company, or is it literally all over the map?
Yeah, I like to say that like discrimination does not discriminate because it
Mhm.
really happens everywhere.
Yeah.
It happens, at large corporations, it happens at hospitals, it happens at the small mom and shop stores.
Mm.
But sometimes what we do see is depending um where the company is or like the field, we get certain like legal defenses that, oh, well, this is just the kind of talk that they talk about at a car dealership, right? Or, your client works in the field and, she has to be around all these men and she expected, to have these, you know, misogynistic comments made about her, right? I mean,
Ay.
sometimes we see that, but no, I mean, at every level, at every tax bracket, at really, discrimination can happen at any place.
That's really unfortunate. So, what tips do you have for leaders that are listening to this to set up their companies to be safe spaces that will not tolerate this?
Right. So, I mean, there's a lot of things places can do. I think kind of talking about what I mentioned before is like setting up policies and
Okay.
procedures so that people are first even aware as to what to do if they're getting discriminated
Mhm.
against, right?
Mhm.
Make sure that there's proper training. I can't tell you how many times people call me after they have watched the sexual harassment training that's mandated in New York that they say, wow, I was watching this training and I realized like, my boss is doing all of these things that I'm hearing about, but I didn't think that it was sexual harassment.
Like what, for example?
Like, make asking me out on dates constantly when I keep saying no, telling me
Sure.
that, coming up to me and touching my shoulders, maybe, texting me at late hours. Oh, and again, we look at
Mhm.
like the totality of things too.
Mhm.
But, not everyone knows, not everything is so overt too.
Mhm.
Obviously, someone getting sexually assaulted, right? Yes, that's an obvious, case of sexual harassment. But sometimes there's, more subtle things, right? Sometimes we have people that are getting like groomed and things are slowly happening. But going back to your question, I mean, these policies and procedures and training your managers,
Mhm.
training your leaders, not only to not sexually harass or discriminate, but what to do if someone comes to you and complains about it.
Right.
So, the training is very significant.
Mhm.
And having a department that can really offer the support to its employees, right? So, we talked about the human resources office or whoever's in charge of managing complaints, but really being a place where they take these cases seriously. And, maybe says, look, we're going to hear what you have to say and then we're going to investigate. We're going to
Mhm.
conduct a thorough investigation because maybe it's not just happening to you, but maybe this is happening to multiple people. And, really trying to offer support to the people that are coming forward so that people are not afraid to come forward because that really is such a significant problem. Why so many women, so many men don't complain while they're still employed.
Brittany, what would you say is the percentage of women versus men that this happens to?
I don't know if I can confidently give a percentage, but what can I can say based on like, the cases, the people that I speak to and the calls we get. I'd say if we're talking about just like sexual harassment,
Mhm.
right, it's probably, our matters tend to be probably like an 80-20 split with women and
Mhm.
men.
Mhm.
And that's not to, and I don't know, that's just where I am in New York
Right.
City. But, as far as discrimination, I mean, that's like a 50-50, right? Because
Mhm.
it happens of all ages, all
Mhm.
disabilities. Retaliation is equal gender. So, that's probably a split down the middle.
I have a friend who, and I, of course, am out in Colorado, a friend whose sister has a number of, I mean, really serious health issues. And she said, she knows that they got rid of her because she was using just too much time for vacation, but they put her into a much larger RIF.
Right.
And I said to her, well, this is what companies do to protect themselves, right? You can't now go to say to them, well, I called out too many days sick with my issue, so firing me for having a medical issue. I mean, is that just literally impossible to ever litigate
Well, it's
situations
not
like that?
impossible. We do handle a lot of those cases. I mean, it's
Mhm.
very smart for the employer to do that, right? They wanna let go of the person that's on leave, right?
That they're
Because
having
of
to
the
pay.
and
Yeah.
right. So often what they do is they terminate them and they hide it behind a reduction in force
Right.
or a restructuring.
Mhm.
We're merging positions. And yes, those cases are difficult, right? Because, most people are at will employees. So, for the most part, employers are allowed to terminate its employees for any reason at all. However, if we're able to say, well, no, the real reason you're terminating them or choosing them specifically in the reduction is not because of a random, draw, but is because this person took time off, then maybe you have a case. But yeah, those cases are always going to be difficult. A lot of times, what we do with those is, people usually get severance packages. We help, get a larger package for those clients because litigation might just be very difficult.
Yeah. So you joined the firm in 2015, so about 10 and a half years ago now. In the time that you have been there, how have you seen your own workplace, right, at Phillips and Associates evolve and
Yeah.
change?
I started here when like the firm was relatively small.
Right.
There was about like I think like 6 attorneys
Mm.
here. We were in a small office space and I feel grateful that I started at like the early years of the firm because I definitely have seen the evolution of what we are today. We have
Mhm.
over 50 employees. There's now, before it was just one partner and everyone else was an associate. Now we have 8 partners. We have,
Mhm.
multiple paralegals and legal administrators. So, we've grown. We now practice not only in New York, but we practice in Florida, New Jersey, Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
We take on more cases. A big growing practice area for us is whistleblowers, people who like complain of any kind of unlawful
Yeah.
activity and then get terminated for that. So, we've grown and it's really been like fun to kind of be in it
Mhm.
while we've done that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What would you say is the biggest bottleneck to growing the firm right now, if any?
The biggest bottleneck to growing the firm, I'd say, New York has very good law, right? Like you kind of want to be practicing in New York and specifically in New York City,
Mhm.
because that's where like the law is most favorable. But like the unfortunate thing is once you start getting out of New York City, even in like New York State or even like in Florida where we practice,
Mhm.
it's a lot more difficult. The law is not as employee friendly. And when you're relying on federal law as opposed to
Mhm.
like favorable state and city law, you do not really want to be in front of those judges and you don't really want to be litigating in those jurisdictions because they will be much more favorable to the employer. So, it really does depend where you're working, unfortunately, as to like what maybe the trajectory of your case may go.
Well, so let's pick Florida because that's where you're growing an office there. What are the thoughts, or however, whether it's, Bill that decided, yeah, I'd like to move into Florida or however that happened, knowing that they're not as employee friendly.
Right.
Why do you
So
then still
I
make the decision to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't practice in Florida. I'm not
Right.
Florida. I'm not licensed there. I think just being able to expand our reach is, an important goal of the
Mhm.
firm.
Mhm.
New Yorkers and Floridians are like kind of go hand in hand. A lot of people like, go back and
True.
forth,
True.
including Bill, who's the managing partner here. He
Mhm.
has, his residence in both places.
Mhm.
But it's a matter of like, establishing a presence in other states, really expanding our reputation, like nationally. But as far as the law, yeah, I mean it's not as favorable, but there's still a lot of claims and people are still getting discriminated against there. And people need representation.
Right, right. Well, obviously, right? So if you had and you may or may not be able to identify this. I normally interview the CEO. So since you as a partner, although not the named partner, so may or may not be able to answer some of these questions. But if you had to identify one thing, if solved, would make the biggest impact in the business growth, what do you think that might be?
I think something that all law firms try and work at is just making sure that, when we speak to someone on the phone who's calling us for the very first time, that we're able to really connect with that client and
Hmm.
like start helping them quickly, retain them as our clients and really, start that process as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Hmm.
People want to connect with their lawyers, right? And people may
Right.
call multiple law firms for a consultation. So being that person that, gets the clients to feel safe with you is an important skill that we have. But, it's also important to get the business and to keep the clients happy.
Yeah. And do you do trainings internally within your own company to teach people how, right? How to be great listeners? Because we're taught a lot of things in school. What we're not taught is how to listen, how to be how to be present, how to be empathetic. And we're living in a pretty divisive world these days.
Yeah, so we do trainings on that. When someone comes and works here within the first few weeks, they train within our intake departments where
Mhm.
they are just listening to people call.
Mm.
So they have a very good idea as to how to handle someone when they are calling, right?
Mhm.
Because again, these people are very emotional. They
Oh,
need
sure.
they need sometimes a lot of hand holding, a lot of assurance that you're going to be the
Mhm.
one who's going to be able to help them. And, you have to be empathetic. This job is not for everyone. You really
Mhm.
need to be able to
Not
wear
blame the
multiple
victim.
hats. You can't play the victim. You have to be able to empathize, but you also have to think, okay, put the emotions aside. How can I best serve this person, right? Like I can feel very badly for them, but I already know that them litigating this case would be detrimental to them,
Mhm.
detrimental to their health. So, kind of wearing multiple hats is very important to be successful
Mhm.
here.
And when you and I first talked, I know I shared some things. I've not shared this publicly ever, of my own sexual harassment throughout the years, right? And just thinking, just put on your big girl panties and suck it up, right?
Right.
And, I think knowing what I know now, I would have handled things considerably differently. Right. And I have to think that part of it is just, educating people. And to your point about, this is going to be detrimental to someone's health, right? Is to be able to really get inside of listening to what they're saying to determine like what's the reason they may or may not survive this.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And like everyone, everyone's different, right? And that's why I always ask my client, like, what is it that you want from this? Is this something that you are looking to maybe, leave your place of employment and maybe we can do things quietly? I can contact the employer. I can try and negotiate some kind of like, departure for you where you
Mm-hmm.
get paid for things?
Right.
Or is this something that you're really looking to litigate, right? And like everyone has their own opinion as to what they want, and then it's
Mm-hmm.
also up to me to tell them, based on what I see, what maybe makes sense given your evidence and your facts as to like what
Mm-hmm.
course of action may be best for you.
Mm-hmm. How do people find your firm, Brittany? Are you doing outbound marketing, inbound? What's it look like?
Yep. So you can, I mean, if you Google Phillips and Associates, you'll find us. You can search for me directly, Brittany Stevens at Phillips and Associates. You can see me on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
I'm Brittany Stevens Alper. But we spend a lot of money to market ourselves on Google.
Mhm.
So you put in one of the best sexual harassment discrimination law firms in New York, and Phillips and Associates should pop
Comes
right
right
up.
on up at the top. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah, I love that. And you are all contingent, correct? All the work you do is contingency?
Yes, we're a
Yeah.
contingency firm.
Mhm.
A lot of our clients cannot pay
Right.
thousands and thousands of dollars for a lawyer. That's usually one of the first questions people call when people
Mhm.
ask when they call us. So we understand that, and we're contingency.
Yeah, yeah. Is there, does anybody ever is there a place for a retained law firm in this industry? I'm curious. Or is it
Yeah,
really just, there's just not enough business that would happen like that?
I mean, it depends. I mean, sometimes people call us and they just want like something reviewed, and we have
Mhm.
we charge by the hour.
Right.
But, for like a discrimination matter, that's like, especially things that go to court or
Mhm.
where we do a significant amount of work. I mean, again, the hourly cost is substantial.
Mhm.
So, the contingency model is really helpful to most people who do not have the financial means to pay a lawyer
Mhm.
X amount of money up front for, a couple of hours of work. Here, we can spend as many hours as possible,
Mhm.
and we're in it together. We only take anything if we're able to get you anything.
Well, right. So you're obviously hedging your bets on, what's going to bring you the revenue that you need, right? Because to the point everybody's working for free until you close a deal, so to speak,
Right.
win a lawsuit. Is there anything that you think is important within this field to talk about that I haven't asked you?
No, I mean, I think like, some big takeaways are really that, if you feel like something is wrong, right, and it's in your gut, then maybe something is wrong at work.
Mhm.
And feeling like you have someone to calling a law firm, kind of just getting a sense as to is what I'm going through unlawful. It should
Mhm.
be something that hopefully people feel comfortable doing, right?
Mhm.
These are confidential communications, but just making sure that they are protecting themselves at their place of
Mhm.
employment, because at the end of the day, the company is going to do everything to protect themselves. So making sure that you're protecting yourself as the employee is very important to do.
Great. Well, I appreciate this conversation. This is, this is just really such importance. And I so often worry for those who live in states, as you've talked about, that are not particularly worker friendly, right?
Right.
So, Brittany Stevens, partner with Phillips and Associates, thanks so much for joining me. I really enjoyed our time together.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. Thank you for having me.